Independence Day, 1999, just after midnight. For 22-year-old Jim Seavone, it's a graduation party on the high seas with friends around him. Jim and his friends are responsible, successful young men, but they're on board to cut loose and have a little fun. Jim tells his friend that he's headed to the bathroom. It's supposed to be a night of celebration on a top-class luxury liner headed for Puerto Rico. The last thing Jim Seavone and his group are looking for is any kind of trouble. Jim Seavone steps away from his partying friends a little after midnight and is never seen again. His vanishing leaves two families caught up in its wake, struggling to find out if Jim Seavone met a sinister fate in international waters. In Meriden, Connecticut, a small city between New Haven and Hartford, the Seavone family celebrates the college graduation of son Jim. 22-year-old Jim Seavone has his whole life ahead of him. Jim graduates from Western Connecticut State University with a degree in economics in the summer of 1999, and his designs on becoming a city planner. Going to grad school at NYU that fall will get him there.
There was a real tight-knit group of 5 guys that went all the way through school together. One of them was Jeff Simeone. Ever since they played Little League, we've known them, and they've been very close. And they've taken trips since they've been adults, like in their 20s. But this was special, this trip, because Jeff's mom had gotten married to his stepfather the year before, and they were going to celebrate their first anniversary. And Jim and Jeff were going to graduate from college that June, and they both had done it in 4 years, which in this day and age is kind of hard to do, but they did it.
So for Jim, this is a great opportunity to take a break from college. He's just graduated, and he's got a lot of work ahead of him when he goes into grad school. So it's an opportunity to let loose a bit with his friends.
As a graduation gift, Jim's parents send him on a cruise with his best friend, Jeff, and 12 members of Jeff's family, young and old.
In January, Jim said, "You know, Mom, I know you were going to give me money like you gave Joe money when he graduated. Do you think we could put that money towards a cruise?" And I said, "If that's what you want for your graduation present from us, then that's what we'll give you."
As a new graduate, Jim can't afford a trip like this, but his parents have seen how hard he's worked through school, how much he deserves to just have a break with his best friend, so they decide to pay for the ticket for him.
Jim's a dedicated student and friend. He's elected captain of both his high school soccer team and tennis team. His teachers and teammates think he's mature beyond his years.
In a nutshell, he's an athlete. He loved sports. He started with T-ball, and then when he got to high school, he decided that he wanted to play tennis. And he was captain of the tennis and the soccer team his senior year. So he was really into sports. He always had a lot of friends. Jimmy had gotten a job that summer as the assistant tennis pro at a country club, and that's the job he had. I remember one of the last things he ever said to me was, "Mom, will you wash one of my whites? I'm gonna need them as soon as I get back," and that was the outfit that he had to wear. He taught little kids tennis at that country club.
Jim was the kind of guy who was always thinking ahead. Even though he had this great cruise planned and was all excited about it, he was still thinking about his responsibilities when he got back. I think it speaks to his character that he's so concerned about his work and thinking about his work when he prepares to go on this pleasure cruise. When most people would want to just forget about work, forget about the responsibilities for a while, he's still planning ahead.
So he was real happy, and his brother drove him to Bradley Airport to meet up with the Simeones and the other families, and they flew to Florida.
Jim, his best friend Jeff, Jeff's college roommate and the roommate's family, Jeff's sister and her boyfriend Jesse, and other members of Jeff's family board the cruise ship in Miami, Florida, bound for San Juan, Puerto Rico on an Independence long weekend cruise.
So this is a huge ship that he's on. It's 12 levels and 100,000 tons. So it's a great way to spend a long weekend. It's a quick trip to Puerto Rico to go and see the beaches there. It's just a great short vacation.
This is a huge ship. There's over 3,000 people on board, lots of young people ready to have a good time. It's almost the 4th of July. So this is just a young group of guys. They're looking to have a good time.
All 14 members of the group go to dinner around 8 p.m.
Jeff's roommate's mother called and talked to me later and said that she just thought my son was a wonderful young man. And she said, I complimented him on his trousers that he was wearing to dinner that night. And he goes, oh, my mom got these for me. And he seemed really proud of his mom.
After dinner, at around 10, the group splits up. The eldest members of the group visit the ship's casino, while Jim, Jeff, and some of the younger members of the group decide to party it up on the dance floor of the 5th deck.
At one point, Jim said, I gotta go to the men's room, and he left. And he came back, but quite a while later. And Jesse said, what happened? Where are you going? He goes, well, I got lost. I mean, this is the first night on the ship. And he said, I finally found a bathroom, and then I couldn't find my way back here.
July 4th becomes July 5th. At around 12:30 a.m., Jim tells Jeff he's going to the bathroom.
So then about 12:30, he told them again he had to go to the men's room. He said, I'll be right back. No one ever saw Jimmy alive again. No one ever saw Jimmy at all.
When Jim tells his friends that he needs to go to the washroom, they don't think anything of it. But then when he doesn't return, even though that might seem a little odd, they just assume, he's a young single guy, he's on this boat with a lot of different people, he probably just met someone. So they don't overreact, they just keep partying.
When he didn't turn up a little while later, his friends went looking for him, so they're not really sure where he's gone at this point.
Jeff gets back to the cabin from the dance club at around 3 in the morning. Jim isn't there, but it doesn't make Jeff worried.
This is July 4th, long weekend, the weekend to have a party and have a good time, so maybe Jim has just found another crowd of people, maybe he's met someone and he's just off on another part of the ship with them.
Next morning, they woke up, and it was about 10 in the morning, and he wasn't there.
So as time goes on, and there's still no sign of Jim, obviously his friends are starting to get very concerned.
Jim isn't back, and his best friend Jeff knows this isn't like Jim. Jeff must get help in his search for answers.
So they went to find Jeff's mom, and then they went to the purser's office and had him paged. They had him paged a number of times.
The page goes ship-wide, asking for Jim to report to the captain's deck, but also for anyone who knows of Jim's whereabouts to come forward.
Then they knew something was wrong, because Tony, Jeff's mom, said, I knew that Jimmy would not ignore that page. He'd know that that would upset me, and he would never want to upset me.
Jeff and his family's worries skyrocket, and they hope Jim turns up soon and safely. 22-year-old Jim Seavone is a diligent student and caring friend who recently graduated with a degree in economics. He's going to NYU for grad school in the fall. As a graduation gift, his parents send him on a 4th of July cruise from Miami to Puerto Rico with friend Jeff and Jeff's friends and family. After a group dinner, the elder members of Jeff's family go to the casino, while the younger ones get a little more wild at the ship's dance club. Jim tells Jeff he needs to go to the bathroom at about 12:30 a.m. But when he doesn't come back, Jeff thinks Jim must have met someone and gone to their cabin. But Jim would never be seen again. Frantically, Jeff and his family join the ship's crew in a cabin-to-cabin search.
So cruise ships don't typically have their own police force aboard. They do have very specific policies with regard to passenger security and crew safety. So crew is trained to act following their procedures, and when a person may be reported missing, they can still gather enough crew to go door to door throughout the ship to check the cabins and check the various venues in the ship to look for a person.
It's like a city. Got thousands of people. They have the workers that clean the rooms, the entertainers. The captain is the mayor of the city. But you know what's missing? Independent police people on cruise ships. There are no independent police. The security on a cruise ship reports to the cruise lines. So many of these crimes involve crew members against passengers, robberies, possible murders.
After an exhausting 12 hours of searching, ship investigators and Jeff's family come up empty.
So this ship is carrying 3,000 passengers along with all the crew to look after them. So this is the size of a small town, all potentially drinking and partying. So trying to search a ship of this size, looking for one person, is quite an ordeal. It's a big task.
Is it possible that Jim met someone in the early morning hours of July 5th, 1999? And did that person have sinister intentions for the young scholar from Connecticut? The search for clues in the mysterious disappearance of Jim Seavone has only just begun, and time is working against them.
The investigation essentially needs to begin immediately because time is running out already. This is where the evidence starts to disappear. So the investigation needs to start right away.
After a harrowing day of searching, Jeff makes the gut-wrenching phone call to Jim's parents, John and Jean Seavone, back in Connecticut. Jeff must deliver the awful news to his best friend's parents that Jim has vanished and they can't find him anywhere on the ship.
And then about 5 o'clock in the afternoon, the phone rang here. My son, Joe, was home from New York. It was 4th of July weekend. And my husband answered the phone, and it was Jeff and Fred, his stepdad. And they told us that they couldn't find Jimmy. Then I talked to the man in charge of the ship. He was in charge of the search and looking for Jimmy. I talked to him actually all night long. And I just stayed up. And he said to me, Mrs. Seavone, we don't lose people on the ships. He's here, we're gonna find him. But they never did.
The next morning, on Tuesday, July 6th, Jean calls the Federal Bureau of Investigation in New Haven, Connecticut. The FBI in New Haven makes 2 calls. The first is to the Coast Guard, who begin a search of the waters where the ship had traveled. But it's nearly pointless.
It's like the proverbial needle in the haystack, except in this case, the haystack is the world's 2nd largest ocean, and the needle is in constant motion. Even with knowing the approximate location the body went over and the approximate time, it's almost impossible for the Coast Guard or anyone else to locate this body.
The second call the FBI makes is to the San Juan office of the FBI to try and board the ship.
And they agreed to go on the ship the next day when it reached there and interview. The ship agreed to allow them to because they didn't have to let them.
At this time, no outside police force can independently investigate a missing persons report on a cruise ship. The FBI has to be invited on board.
Somebody goes overboard, it's the family that follows up on it. The U.S. passenger, if the ship leaves the United States and comes back to the United States, is protected and has these rights. But they may not be advised what their rights are at that time. The victim has the right to go directly to the FBI instead of giving the report to the security on the cruise ship, which is going to manipulate that report. Once in a while, they'll bring somebody to the ship, and they might be there for a day, and that's it.
The crew posts Jim's photo around the cruise ship, alerting the rest of the passengers that Jim is officially missing. Will the FBI solve the mysterious disappearance of Jim Seavone? 22-year-old Jim Seavone is on a celebration cruise when a night of July 4th partying turns horribly wrong. Jim leaves the party to go to the bathroom and vanishes. Jim's best friend Jeff and the ship's crew search the ship but come up empty. With a heavy heart, Jeff calls Jim's parents. Jim's mom, Jean, calls the FBI, who board the ship to investigate the mysterious disappearance of Jim Seavone. FBI investigators stationed in San Juan are granted permission to board the ship on July 6th. They conduct their own search for the whereabouts of Jim Seavone. They also interview all the people in Jim's party, looking for some kind of clue or motive.
So they went on the ship the next afternoon, and from the report, it seemed that they had made up their mind that usually something bad happens to someone, it's someone they knew, and so they decided that it probably was Jeff.
In my experience, random homicides don't happen very often. Typically, there's some relationship between the victim and the perpetrator. Anything could have happened in this particular case. He could have wound up at the wrong place at the wrong time. But the odds of it being somebody he knew, those seem to be higher than it just being a random event.
So when they went on the ship, they questioned Jeff to length for several hours. He told them that the girls he was dancing with, they could tell them that he'd been in the dance floor up until probably 2 o'clock in the morning with them. So they told him he had to go look through the pictures that when you board on a cruise ship, they take your picture. So he had to go down there to find the girls.
The girls that Jim and Jeff danced with had actually already seen Jim's picture posted around the ship and told the crew that they'd been with Jim and Jeff the night before. The crew wasn't interested, but the FBI interviews the girls, and the alibi clears Jeff.
The FBI did interview them, and once they realized that, they didn't think it was Jeff.
As the FBI does their own search of the cruise ship, investigators discover vomit outside on one of the decks. Perhaps Jim had become ill. Certainly, Jim would not have been the first person to feel sick on a cruise ship. Jim's repeated visits to the bathroom suddenly takes on a new significance for investigators. One theory no one has considered is whether something was slipped into Jim's drink when he wasn't looking. Is it possible he was drugged?
But Jim suddenly becomes ill and needs to go to the bathroom, and a number of things could happen. Could be anything. The rapid onset of illness could be attributed to a seasickness, but it could also be attributed to the fact that he was slipped something into a drink. Maybe he was drugged.
Could Jim's illness have something to do with his vanishing? And what if that illness wasn't an accident? Is it possible that a random encounter with a stranger at the bar could have turned deadly for Jim?
Just like airlines, cruise ships have security to keep people from bringing anything illicit on board. You're not even allowed to bring your own alcohol. But things do manage to slip through. Although it is unusual that someone would drug a healthy young single guy who wasn't waving around lots of money.
If Jim Seavone was drugged at the nightclub and then took ill before falling victim to a predator, what was the motivation?
Jim's a solid guy. He's athletic. He's well-liked. He's generally a happy person. That typically doesn't lend itself to being an easy victim. He's got friends looking out for him. He's not a loner who may seek to be by themselves and therefore preyed upon by somebody else. It's a little unusual to have somebody like Jim be a target on a ship.
During his interrogation, Jeff tells the FBI agent that Jim looked completely fine when he went to the bathroom. Jim didn't complain to anyone about feeling unwell.
And the boys, I asked them, and I did for a number of occasions, can you really tell me how Jimmy was that night? And they all totally assure me he was fine. We all had some drinks. They were 22. But he said he was fine. There was nothing wrong with him. My son, Joe, told me that he also had asked them over and over, sort of like, I'm not going to tell my mother, just let me know how he was. And they said the same thing.
The interrogations continue all day long. Eventually, a few witnesses claiming to have identified Jim from the posters come forward with what they saw the night before.
So we have a number of sightings of Jim by eyewitnesses. The first one was that he was seen around 12:30 in the morning, standing next to an elevator, eating something, and he appeared very intoxicated at the time. A second witness saw Jim later on, early in the morning, walking in a hallway.
They saw him on a certain floor of the boat, knocking on doors, and appeared to be very drunk.
So we don't have any sign of foul play at this time. We just have an intoxicated Jim in various places on the boat.
But even with the security cameras and canvassing of passengers, investigators can't locate Jim after 12:30. The FBI doesn't find any clues to help them solve the mysterious disappearance. On the night of July 6th, after a day of investigation, the FBI calls Jim Seavone with heartbreaking news.
Without the finding of any evidence whatsoever, all we're left with is eyewitness testimony that Jim was there. So we don't know if anything untoward happened to him at all. The fact that he's seen a couple of times in the middle of the night gives us a timeline to know that he was still alive at that point, but beyond that, there's nothing else to work off.
By this time, the ship has traveled so far that the likelihood of finding him is almost impossible.
The FBI tell Jim's parents that the only conclusion they could reach is that somehow Jean and John's son must have accidentally fallen overboard.
With that information that the FBI felt they had, they just called us about 10 o'clock at night and said, well, he must have fallen overboard. And that was the end of that.
The FBI may have come to a conclusion, but Jean is nowhere near satisfied. She has her own theory about what happened to Jim.
I think Jimmy saw something he shouldn't have seen, and someone hurt him.
Could Jim have seen something in the early morning hours that got him thrown overboard? As Jean digs deeper into her son's disappearance, she'll find some shocking surprises. Jim Seavone celebrates his college graduation with a 4th of July cruise to Puerto Rico. It's a night of fun, friends, and freedom. Jim tells his good friend Jeff that he's going to the bathroom. Then, Jim simply vanishes into thin air and is never seen or heard from again. The San Juan, Puerto Rico office of the FBI is granted permission to come aboard. They conduct interviews with the crew and members of the 13-person party Jim was on the cruise with. Jim's best friend, Jeff, is interviewed at length and provides every detail he can remember about their short time aboard the ship. Is it possible that a random encounter with a stranger at the bar could have turned deadly? Investigators come up empty in their search for clues that could tell what happened to Jim. There's one more witness who claims to have seen him that night.
And there was a bartender in the Point After disco that he'd been in at that evening. And the bartender said that he was drunk. He walked up to the bar. He wanted to buy a drink for a young lady who was also a passenger. And he tried to pay cash for the drink. And the bartender tried to explain to him that they couldn't take cash. They had to have their card.
So cruise ships are typically advertised as being cashless. You don't have to carry money around with you when you're on the boat, but they give you a sail card, which is your pass to get on and off the boat, as well as you use it in lieu of cash when you purchase drinks. So anytime your sail card is used, it's tracked. And you can tell where it's used on the ship, what time it was used. Unfortunately, you can't tell who used it, just that it was in fact used to purchase something.
The bartender says Jim was drunk and became angry when he wouldn't accept the cash for the drinks.
So then Jimmy supposedly said to them, you know, there are bad people around and I might be one of them. And the first time I ever laughed was when I heard that. That was so uncharacteristic of him, it's ridiculous.
Gene checks for the activity records on Jim's key card.
If you knew for a fact that somebody had disappeared at a certain time and the sail card was used after that, one would wonder who had the card and how they got it. So if that sail card is used, timestamps from that could be cross-referenced with video surveillance from the ship to determine who was using the card at the time.
What if Jim brought a stranger back with him to the cabin before something nefarious happened? The sail card would tell investigators what time that would have happened.
I had called. I said, I have a question about my son's bill. We have to pay for it, and I need a copy of what he spent on and everything. And she said, oh, okay, fine, and she sent it to me. And it shows that approximately 10 after 12, he bought 2 drinks in the Point After disco with his card. After that, he never bought anything. He never went to another bar and bought drinks, nothing. The card also showed that he never returned to the cabin.
Once again, the trail goes cold. There are no purchases on the card after 12:10 a.m., right before the last time Jim was seen.
The FBI sticks to their conclusion that no foul play has been involved, but it seems odd that they would come to that conclusion without a body. How do they know there's no foul play without a body? Jim still hasn't been found.
After hearing a number of ship-wide pages and seeing posters all over the ship, passengers wonder what's become of him. The ship's crew tells passengers they believe it might be a suicide. Passengers are told that Jim has recently broken up with his fiancée and must be so distraught that he leaps overboard.
He was not engaged. He wasn't seriously dating anyone at the time. That was told to people that were on the ship when they would say, did you find that young man? One told us that they asked and they said, oh, well, he never really got on the ship. And then another woman asked and they told her that he was very broken up over splitting up with this girlfriend or fiancé or whatever. And he jumped overboard, committed suicide. From my experiences with a lot of other people that have been victims on cruise ships, that's usually what they do. They downplay it.
So we know he's disappeared from the ship, and one of the possibilities, of course, is that he's committed suicide. But as an investigator, one would wonder why somebody like Jim would commit suicide. He had everything going for him. He'd just graduated college and was about to embark on a graduate degree. He was reportedly a very happy person. He was healthy.
Here you have this guy, he's just graduated from university, he's gonna be a future city planner, he has everything to live for, never shown any signs of depression or wanting to harm himself. Why would he kill himself? Just doesn't make any sense.
There was nothing found that indicated he had problems in his personal life that would make him want to take his own life.
As far as family and friends are concerned, Jim vanished into thin air sometime around 12:30 a.m. on July the 5th, and there was no way he would have done himself harm. Could Jim have run into the wrong person, as his mother suspects? Did the cruise ship leave Jim afloat in the waters of the Atlantic as it sailed into port at San Juan? Parents Jean and John begin urgent appeals to the public for any new information.
That's their standard response. Guy must have committed suicide. He's gone missing on a cruise ship. Then they better show us how it was a suicide.
Jim's parents and friends try to stay hopeful that somehow Jim is alive. But a stultifying new piece of evidence leads them to believe that their son met with a terrible fate. Just after midnight on July 5th, 1999, college graduate Jim Seavone tells his friends he's headed to the bathroom and then vanishes into thin air. The next day, Jim's friend Jeff leads a cabin-to-cabin search looking for his best friend. But after 12 hours, they come up empty. The FBI concludes that Jim, after a night of indulgence, must have gotten so sick that he fell overboard. Jim's family and friends don't believe that theory holds water. A rumor is spread on the ship that Jim was brokenhearted and committed suicide. But he wasn't in any serious relationship at the time. Jim's family tries to remain hopeful, but a new development may mean that Jim met a violent end. A panicked phone call to a stranger's cabin sheds new light on what might have happened to the missing Jim Seavone.
A woman was in her cabin on the cruise, and her phone rang. And she picked the phone up, and she heard a man yelling, help me, I can't get out of here."
Phones on cruise ships are pretty much like hotel phones. You can reach other rooms, you can reach the front desk. For another fee, you can reach someone on land. So just by dialing a few different numbers, you could randomly reach someone's room. In this case, it seems like Jim or someone else may have gotten a hold of someone, this woman, who is finding this phone call very hard to forget.
And then she heard a crash. She said it sounded like a lamp that was breaking, and a scuffle.
If there was a struggle with Jim, you think he would have fought back. He was an athletic guy, he was a bigger guy, he was a young guy. So you think someone would have heard, or there would have been some sign of a struggle. So who could have done something to him without him fighting back?
And then the line went dead. This was Monday morning at 11 o'clock, so the 5th of July.
This woman receives a frantic phone call from a person claiming that he's trapped in a room. And really, that's all we know.
Who could be at the other end of this call? It could be a prank call, or it could be Jim. After all, he's the only one that goes missing at the end of that night.
Did Jim Seavone find a way to free himself from would-be attackers and then frantically call for help?
This is something that the investigators will consider when trying to establish if this was in fact Jim. They may be able to trace where the call came from through the ship's phone, and they can determine whether this woman is credible or not.
After she saw the pictures and in the pages over the intercom, she went to the purser's office to tell them about this phone call. And so she also was questioned by the FBI.
It would seem to me that this phone call is not just completely random. Given the circumstances of somebody being reported missing, now we have this phone call from a frantic person claiming to be trapped in a room or unable to get out. It lends credibility to what this woman is saying.
Was Jim being targeted for some unknown reason? Who was behind it? Was it one person, several people, and why? What would be the reason for doing something to this young man who just graduated from school? The investigation needs to look into this and answer some of these questions.
If there was a struggle, there was no sign of it picked up by investigators. It's a dead end for the FBI.
The fact that another passenger got that mysterious phone call, that instantly should indicate that something very wrong happened to Jim, or at least someone on the ship, and it should kick the investigation into overdrive.
But the FBI seemed to have no interest in informing Jim's parents of this new development.
So when she got home, she wanted our address. She wanted to talk to his parents. And so she called the corporate office, and they told her at that point that that never happened. There was no such thing happened on that ship.
The standard procedure to handle crimes on a cruise ship was cover-up. And when you're a victim of a crime, you think you're the only person in the world that's experienced this. All of a sudden you realize this is something that's happening all the time, and there are hundreds of people affected by it.
Later on, when the stranger who received the distressing phone call sees Jim Seavone on television, she decides to reach out.
And she saw me in telling the story, and she remembered all of that. The phone rang, and it was her to tell us that that had happened. She said she'd never forgotten it.
Incredibly, the FBI takes no further action on the claims of this witness and sticks with their conclusion: no evidence of foul play.
It's easy to speculate that foul play was involved, but in the absence of any evidence that there was foul play, it's hard to come to that conclusion. There's absolutely nothing further to go on at this point.
It wasn't a closed case. In fact, this went on, and all of a sudden I was getting the telephone runaround. So I started complaining about that to FBI in Washington. And I wrote a letter about their behavior during this case. And then they finally said to me, okay, we can give you the report, but then we're closing the case. And I said, all right, give me the report, because they were obviously not doing anything. They had made up their mind what happened to them.
If what the woman says is true, and the caller was Jim, then Jim's attacker or attackers got away with murder. Jean and John won't give up on their son. They make continued appeals to the public for years.
And I started searching. Did this ever happen to anyone else? Is this common to happen? And doing that over the course of a year or more, I would find something else that happened to someone else. And so then I thought, the worst thing about this, besides not having Jimmy in my life, is that you feel like, how could this happen? And you feel so alone. And so I would make copies of these articles of the other people, and I would send it to someone that now has someone that's missing, so that they would know that this does happen.
Everyone thinks cruises are just a fun, safe way to travel. And unfortunately, they don't find out how many people have gone missing or had horrible things happen to them on cruises until something has happened to them. So it was the same with Jean. She felt alone until she reached out and found that there were other families who had gone through similar circumstances that she could bond with.
That seems to be the whole atmosphere with a cruise ship in the industry itself, is that we're the happy thing, we're the happy vacation, nothing bad happens, we don't want to deal with that, we don't want to talk about that. Prove to everybody that this is a safe vacation, this is a safe thing to do, instead of just trying to wash it away, trying to pretend it doesn't exist. These people do exist, and they still exist in our hearts.
Years later, Jean receives a call from the local authorities that may just reignite her hope of finding out what happened to Jim.
2 years ago, we got a phone call from our local police and said that we'd like to come over and do a DNA test on you and your husband because they are reopening Jimmy's case. And they came and they took swabs and all, and they sent it. I, of course, wanted to know why they were doing this, and they said that a body had come ashore many years later, and they were trying to ID. So that's why they did it. I said, well, will I find out? He said, if it's him, you will find out. If it isn't, you're not going to find anything out. And we never heard back from them.
Years of persistence would land the Seavones on primetime television, and even a statement to the House of Representatives on international maritime security.
Well, I met Jim Seavone at the first congressional hearing. I realized that she had lost a son. And Jean had done something before International Cruise Victims was ever formed. When she saw somebody going missing, she wrote him a note, connected with him.
Jean and John co-found the International Cruise Victims Association to help bring attention to the plight of those who meet with a dark fate on international waters.
Jean, to this day, does major work for International Cruise Victims. She was one of the original members, but she stayed with it and is still working in behalf of her son. We're all doing this in behalf of the victims that we lost.
Because of the International Cruise Victims Association, the U.S. is the only country that has the right to investigate crimes against its citizens on cruise ships.
So the law is on the books. It mentions a lot of different issues and things, like man overboard systems be installed on all ships. What that would be is something technical on the railings so that if a body goes over by the weight of it, it will send off bells and whistles and the ship will know something, that someone has gone overboard.
It's a laser system that'll identify a body going overboard immediately. If they knew exactly when they went over and where they went over, they might actually save some of these people. As the bill said, man overboard systems are required. The cruise lines don't want it. It's required by the law that these systems be overboard. For the Coast Guard to spend up to $1 million looking for somebody in the open ocean, it just only makes sense, but they don't want to do it.
That still has not been installed on ships. The fact that you have a law doesn't mean that they're going to obey that law, because then you have to have someone that enforces that law. So we're continuing to work on that.
Jean and her husband have advocated for cruise ship victims for years, but their son still remains missing.
What happened to Jim? Now, if there'd been man overboard systems and you see this kid jumping over, you know what happened. But in his case, don't know what happened. And even though he was with a family, which you would have thought would have helped out in this case, with the lack of cooperation with the cruise lines, you just lost.
In a case like this, where there's no body found, there's no answers, there's no closure for the family, that bond she's formed with the other victims is even more important.
For Jean and John Seavone, hope has faded over 2 decades that they will ever get answers about what happened on July 5th, 1999. The fate of their son, Jim, remains a mystery.
It'll often come up with people that you just meet. How many kids do you have? And I cannot bring myself to say I have one son, because I don't have one son. I gave birth to 2 sons. I still feel that Jimmy is with me. In fact, right before this, I looked over my shoulder because that's where he always is.